Hello, colleagues, and welcome back. Just checking that the translation is on. Marve, is the translation on? Okay. So, colleagues, please get your headsets if you need one. We are going to start an interesting set of sessions from now on. So we are here now to get started with the keynote address session in your agenda, as you will see it. And we have lined up a fantastic team of experts here. I'm not going to take too much time. I'm going to hand over the floor to our moderator for this session, Valerie Hickey. She's the Global Director of Climate Change with the World Bank, and she's held many, many positions in the bank, including as the Director of Environment. So you will see for yourself when she goes through the moderation and her views on this subject. So look forward to an interesting session. And let me hand over to Valerie to take the reins from here. Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you very much, Nita. Good morning, almost good afternoon, friends, and especially to the minister who was with us this morning, His Excellency, to the Excellency, the Director General of OGM, to the Vice Minister of Turkmenistan, and to everybody who's here today. Thank you for joining us for one of the most important discussions we need to have. I want to start by saying that forest fire management is a family business for me. I met my husband, who's a wildland firefighter, when we were both training to fight forest fires. He still investigates forest fires with the U.S. Forest Service, and so for me, forest fires is important. And of course, as a development specialist, forest fires matter because forests matter. Forests are an engine of jobs and GDP. His Excellency, the Minister, this morning talked about the importance of forests, not just from an economic perspective, certainly not just from an environmental perspective, but from a social and cultural perspective too. Especially across Europe and Central Asia, forests have been part of the landscape and part of the lives and livelihoods of tens of millions of people. Unfortunately, today, forests are also part of the problem, part of the climate change problem when they're on fire. The numbers are quite frightening. The length of the forest fire season in most countries has been increased by a third. That means OGM, other agencies in your countries who are fighting forest fires have to be on alert now much longer than they used to be before. But it's not just that climate change has made the forest fire season worse. It's that forest fires themselves are causing climate change. This is the vicious cycle. When climate change makes forest fires worse and forest fires make climate change worse, that's how the road to hell is paved. Just last year alone, the emissions, the climate emissions, the carbon emissions from fires were 3 times more than they were just 20 years ago. In fact, the emissions from forest fires are more than the emissions from Australia every year. They are almost as much as the emissions from Canada every year. So we need to fight forest fires not just because they are destroying an incredibly important economic and cultural and environmental resource, but because they are accelerating climate change. That's why we're here today to talk about integrated forest fire management and the response. We have some wonderful panelists with us today who are going to talk about the trends and triggers of forest fires and some of the best responses in this space. Because we all know not all fires are the same. There are forest-driven ecosystems. Some forest fires are important to regenerate forests, but today, these forest fires are different. They're hotter, they're more extreme, and as we were reminded this morning by several of the speakers, most of them are human-caused. It's people setting fire to the forests, sometimes intentionally, but mostly by mistake. but those are hugely costly mistakes. And that's why we'll be discussing these next 2 days and in the panel this morning some of the important keys to integrated forest fire management. And there are 4 of them. The first and the most important one really is around forest management, fuels management, landscape management, thinking about the forest before the fire. The second important key is data. And this is something we're going to hear from the diaspora in Turkey sitting in San Diego. We're going to hear some great examples of some of the new trends in data. But interagency collaboration, and as you heard from Humberto Lopez this morning from the World Bank, international collaboration is absolutely key. No one agency can do this alone. And that's why we're also so proud that we have partners from the WEF Wildfire Network, FAO's Global Fire Hub, and Korea's AFACO here with us to share their experiences and their lessons. And I have to thank the Korean Green Growth Fund at the World Bank for helping to bring all of these experts here today to not just listen to the excellent leadership from Turkey, but to learn from other good examples elsewhere. But the fourth most important key to forest fire management, and you've heard it from every speaker who stood up here today, is prevention. We need to stop the fires before they start. And it's getting harder. Here in Turkey, we all talk about the terrible, terrible forest fires of 2022 happening at the same time as the terrible floods. But in 2023, there were 1,500 fires. Last year, 2,500 fires. Stopping fires before they start is getting harder, but it is possible. It is doable, and it's being done here in Turkey. And that's why the 5 R's that you heard about today, reviewing, risk reduction, readiness, response, and recovery, are at the heart of what Turkey is doing, including through the $400 million investment that they're undertaking with the World Bank to really support the 20 million people who are living in these areas that are prone to forest fires, these almost 7 million hectares of land. And those are some of the lessons we're going to learn from today. That's why we're here. But more importantly, we're not here just to listen to me. We're here to listen to the actual experts who are doing the very, very important work of thinking through how does prevention work? How do we do it better? And I'm extremely grateful for our 3 guests here today, one of whom is virtual. First, we have Nick Loris, who's the Executive Vice President of Policy at C3 Solutions, based in Washington, D.C. in the United States. And he's going to talk about the global context of extreme forest fires. Some of the key impacts. He's going to talk to us a little bit about the environmental and economic costs of forest fires, to put everything we're talking about today in the context of what it means, not for forest agencies, but for ministries of finance, for ministries of health, for ministries of competitiveness. Then I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by İlkay Altintas, who's one of your own, who's the Chief Data Science Officer at the San Diego Supercomputer Center. So she's our chief nerd, if I can use that word in the best way, sitting with us today, who's really going to share with us some of those regional trends in forest fires, but in particular how to use data and evolving technologies for better decision making. And then we also have Giovanbattista de Dato, who's going to be joining us online. He's saving his carbon footprint. He's going to be coming to us virtually to talk about how one of the statutory bodies of the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, has been working on Mediterranean forests and Mediterranean forest fires. And he's a researcher at the Council for Agricultural Research and Agricultural Economy Analysis. So with that, Nick, I'm going to hand over to you.
Well, thank you for that introduction. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. So for those of you who don't know C3 Solutions, we are a Washington, D.C. based think tank that's focused on energy, environment, and climate issues. And if we could pull up my PowerPoint presentation. Perfect. Thank you so much. Make sure. If there are two things I want you to take away from my talk today, it is number one, that whatever you think about the costs of wildfires are to your community, to your country, to your region, or to the planet, it is very likely an underestimate. And that is why, for number two, it is so important to invest in prevention and risk reduction. Just as we invest in our health, we diet, we exercise to avoid costs down the road, we need to take those same measures and act with urgency to reduce the risk and prevent wildfires from happening, because the cost of inaction is so much higher. And those costs are staggering. I don't want to overwhelm you with numbers, and you probably know the cost estimates of your respective countries better than I do, but the suppression costs alone can run into the tens of billions of dollars each year. If you look at the insurance loss claims, that bar chart in the top left corner, insurance losses have increased from $4 billion globally from the beginning of the century in the first decade to more than quadrupling to $45 billion in the second decade, and it is projected that we are going to be over $100 billion globally within this decade too. And it's not just the insurance losses, it's also the reinsurance market. And that affects all of us because the reinsurance market exists to spread those costs and risks around. And so what happens in the United States and Canada and Australia can impact the premiums and the prices that you pay. What we've seen already from the California Palisades fire is that the reinsurance market in Germany lost $2 billion in the first quarter of 2025 alone. Now, when we talk about global pictures, these costs get even bigger. One of the statistics that caught a lot of media attention was from a report by the World Economic Forum in 2023. Many of you are probably familiar with this report. It was discussing the deployment of artificial intelligence and used Turkey as a pilot project example of how to successfully do that. In the beginning of that report, they cited a statistic that said the annual cost of global wildfires is $50 billion. I talked to the modeling research company. It's called Enki Research, the disaster modeling company that computed that statistic. He said that $50 billion is likely on the low end of the spectrum for annual costs, and they could be well over $200 billion per year. In fact, again, if you just look at the Los Angeles, California wildfires, it is projected by AccuWeather that damage done by that wildfire alone is going to be $275 billion, and we're not even through the worst part of wildfire seasons in many parts of the country and many parts of the world. I contend that the costs are even much higher than that. So one of the reasons I was asked here is because I focus a lot as an economist on costs, on fiscal issues, on overall gross domestic product and economic activity within a country, particularly the United States, but also through regional dialect as well. When I testified before the United States Senate in 2023, we worked a lot on examining what those costs were. That allowed me to work with members in the United States Senate and their researchers to look at a real comprehensive look at what those costs are, both economically, environmentally, and socially. And so if you look at some of the larger slices of this pie, there are costs that we don't necessarily always consider when associated with wildfire. That large slice of the pie, the $337 billion, is asset depreciation. And we're seeing this more and more as a result of insurance premiums going up and people living in uninsurable areas, not just from wildfires, but from extreme weather events around the world. This is going to be replicated the more people we have in the world, as well as the more we're building. And if those wildfire risks increase around the world, that asset depreciation could be even lower. Secondly, looking at that yellow slice of the pie, and we talked a little bit about this morning, is the watershed costs and the environmental costs. It leads to worse soil erosion, worse biodiversity. All the environmental costs are very significant. Not to mention the darker blue, one we just know to be true, the economic losses to communities. People lose their homes, people lose their livelihoods, tourism is reduced, property damage is significant. And then public health. We know that wildfire smoke has adverse impacts on human health and the environment. What we looked at and with the latest epidemiological research was around $200 billion a year as a result of dealing with wildfire smoke. And there's links to dementia, there's links to respiratory illness, there's links to Alzheimer's disease, and premature deaths can be anywhere from 165,000 to over 200,000 as a result of increased wildfire smoke. And this is an area where the research is still pretty nascent. We don't fully understand the long-term effects of wildfire smoke on human health, so this could very likely be an underestimate. Even staying inside can put you at risk when there's a wildfire. There is recent research from the academies that showed that 1 in 8 people from 2003 to 2022, that's 1 billion people, had at least one day of wildfire risk smoke from just being indoors and the home not being insulated from that smoke. If you look at the World Health Organization statistics of what we need to do to insulate our homes and keep the particulate matter levels below the 5 micrograms per cubic meter, that's a $68 billion problem just from the wildfire smoke alone. The WHO actually calculates the full tally to be $4 trillion, and that includes everything from cooking inside and other activities. But at the same time, wildfire smoke still remains a real risk, even indoors. And I have a personal connection to this. These are my friends. I was actually the officiant of their wedding. They live in Oregon, in the western United States right now. That picture right there is actually a picture outside of their deck in Oregon. They used to live in Northern California. They had to evacuate 4 separate times as a result of potential wildfires destroying their homes. They felt like they couldn't withstand that anymore. They sold their house lower than what they wanted to get for it because it was becoming an increasingly uninsurable area. And now they even move their family back to the East Coast to avoid the western wildfire smoke. And that means they're not spending money in their local grocery stores or restaurants. That means fewer people are visiting their town in the summertime. All of these are some of the hidden costs that we see to a country's economy as a result of increased wildfires. And Valerie talked about the increased climate damage. I think she gave a number of good examples as to how one megafire can just wipe out years, if not decades, of climate action. The California wildfires wiped out 2 decades of all of their environmental and climate policies. That can have real costs, too. It's not an easy transition away from fossil fuels. It's getting a little easier as clean energy gets cheaper, but these policies have costs. Not to mention they can undo a lot of carbon offset projects. And so if we are trying to use carbon offsets and voluntary carbon markets to find financially viable ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, one wildfire can not just wipe out an entire project, but it can increase the skepticism about using offsets as an effective climate policy tool. And no matter where you live, the wildfires are expected to get worse in every region of the world. Looking through 2020 to 2080, the lighter bubble is 2020, the darker bubble is 2080, and you can see they grow in size and they shift in increase in frequency and severity. So that means, as populations grow, as people develop more, as people build more in what's known as the wildland-urban interface, where there's this intersection of human economic development and nature, more assets are going to be at risk. And I want to emphasize that any year could be your year to have a bad wildfire season. there are certainly some areas of the world where regions and countries are more at risk than others, but just because it hasn't happened in a few years, that doesn't mean we should get lulled into a sense of comfort and a sense of complacency when it comes to investing in the tools that can reduce risk and really improve prevention. And that's where we need to focus. Really investing in and showing the economic and environmental and social returns in risk reduction and prevention management. We've seen and heard earlier statistics about what €1, what $1, whatever currency you want to use means for economic and environmental returns. And they are significant. I laid out all of the environmental, economic, and social costs. And the math is relatively simple on this, is that all of those costs turn into benefits when you actually prevent the wildfires from happening. And we're not going to reduce the risk down to zero. Wildfires are going to happen. Lightning strikes are going to happen, again, as populations grow, and 85 to 90% are human caused, from cigarettes, power lines down, cars backfiring, campfires. Those risks are all going to be out there, but to the extent that we invest in the tools that help reduce the severity and frequency of these fires, it's going to be critically important. And we have to use all the tools in the toolkit. When I talk to policymakers in the United States federal government, I say, when you're crossing a river, would you rather walk across a tightrope or walk across a bridge? Just investing in one of these tools is a tightrope. Investing in all of them, the forest management, prescribed burns, mechanical thinning, AI, hardening homes, that is the bridge that gets us to successful risk reduction and wildfire prevention. And I think some tools are more important than others. Obviously prescribed burns and mechanical thinning, I think that really shows the efficacy of what can happen when you're actively managing on the ground. And I'll give you one example. There was a fire out in Oregon in 2021 in the western United States. The federal government's land looked a lot like that top left picture, and the fire was racing through. The firefighters, it was out of control. They couldn't get a grasp on it. It was racing up the canopy because that fuel density allows it to rush up, go up the canopy, and race across. It transitioned, the wind took it to a privately managed forest that was managed by an environmental NGO, the Nature Conservancy. The fire dramatically shifted. The firefighters reported it was much easier to contain. The canopies were left intact, and the recovery efforts were a lot less costly. And these are the environmental returns you get from doing both. It's not just one or the other. The prescribed burns, the mechanical thinning provide that environmental return. And having the ability to do both is what can successfully lead to the environmental health of forests and reducing the back-end costs of recovery efforts. And again, we know that not all fire is bad. We're going to hear a lot about that this conference over the next 2 days. Again, this just shows one visual example of what happens when you have good fire fighting bad fire. And lastly, I'll just close by saying that we know what the solutions are. We need the resources and actually have the policies that deploy them. In the United States, bureaucratic red tape, litigation can be very difficult to enact these tools, everything from deploying AI to having the prescribed burns and mechanical thinning. And so, one of my roles as a public policy analyst is to identify where we can streamline these processes, again, because a lot of times what we've seen in the United States is that these projects for prescribed burns and mechanical thinning have to go through a permitting process, a lengthy environmental review. Sometimes they get held up for years in litigation because environmentalists are concerned about endangered species. And the problem is when these projects are held up, the forests burn through, the endangered species that they're worried about and their habitats are no longer intact. So yes, we need to be careful about doing these processes in the right way, but we need to act with scale and urgency. That's going to give us the economic and environmental returns that we need so much. And from there, I'll hand it over.
Thank you so very much, Nick. I think that presentation was a great example of a tale of two stories. The big numbers, the economic numbers on forest fires. These numbers are absolutely frightening. For a country like the US, for the forest fire in California, this year to cost $250 billion. To have the forest fire season in 2020 lay waste to 20 years worth of investments in climate emission reductions. That's money that the government of California didn't necessarily have to start with and certainly doesn't have now. And yet, all of those numbers haven't created, for some reason, the incentive to do the kind of regulation and infrastructure investment needed to support prevention. One of the things we're going to do after we've finished with our three presentations is open up for some questions, but I know one question I'm going to ask Nick is, where is the gap? Why is there a gap between the data and the evidence and action? And that's why I'm delighted we have İlkay next, who's going to help us think through the data and evidence for Europe and Central Asia and here in Turkey, and how there is some action happening. Thank you, İlkay.
Thank you. İyi günler. Bugün davetiniz için özellikle çok teşekkür ederim. Türkiye'de yaşayan bir Türk olarak bugün özellikle sizlerle burada olmaktan onur duyuyorum. Konuşmamın geri kalanını maalesef İngilizce yapacağım. Ama tabii ki her zaman Türkçe olarak da konuşmayı isterim. Good afternoon or good morning to everyone. I'm going to talk about the role of data in general in fighting and living with fire. As we heard really beautifully stated, we have an increasing fire problem, and it's costing us. It's costing us our economies, but it's also costing us our livelihoods, our sense of place, our ability to enjoy the outdoors and indoors even during these events. And fire, in general, is an inevitable part of nature. So it's a natural process. Nature actually cleans itself through fire. And we need to see some fire on our landscapes for healthy forests. But the type of extreme forest fires we are having, there's nothing natural about that. And that's a problem, actually, we can solve if we put our minds together, and that's exactly what we are doing today here. What we mean by that? Actually, nature is really used to having a lower intensity form of fire. So on a regular day, which is not an extreme fire weather event, this is Los Angeles, Topanga Canyon, an ignition can lead to a fire which is pretty much manageable, and we suppress those fires. Suppression is really good. What happens is, when a day like this happens, the same ignition point, which is defined by, in California, our Santa Ana conditions, which is high winds, lower humidity, and other conditions related to that in terms of wind direction and things like that. It leads to not just a larger amount of area burn, but it leads to now going into the areas like we experienced in January 2025 fires, into the areas where humans are actually really active, what we refer to as the wildland-urban interface. And the first fire is a natural fire. If we let that maybe happen and clean the landscape, we might not have had the second fire there. Of course, it's not that simple. We had a century of fire suppression, even a little bit more in the United States, which led to what we refer to as the fire deficit. That means a little counterintuitive, but we have too little fire on our landscapes. But all we see is fire, destructive fire. So these extreme fires that burn in high intensity, can we reduce some of them and replace them with lower intensity fires that clean the landscapes? That's the prescribed fire. And this is a worldwide problem. If you look at California, largest 20 fires happened in the 19 of them happened in the last 20 years. I personally experienced the first time 2003 fires in San Diego, total devastation. That fire was one of the first ones to get on the list after many decades. If you look at the trend globally, it's similar. Here we have Turkey, of course, from the fires in 2021, which was equally devastating. There are hundreds of these just if you look at online, these reports. So as we heard, this is really becoming a global trend. And 2025, 2023, 2020, what happened then? Of course, in LA, we had fires that really devastated our wild and urban interface. But what happened on the aftermath is it was also the largest hazmat operation related to battery fires in the history. Smoke from the fires not just had fire smoke like we had from Canada, which is the forests burning in Canada, these old growths, in 2023, which hit not just once but twice Washington, D.C., devastating those communities with the effects of smoke. 2020, of course, no smoke is good for human beings to inhale, even low-intensity fire. But with these larger fires, there is an intense amount of smoke. And what happens is actually some of that smoke went around 3 weeks after the California fires in 2020. That smoke reached Europe. This is Barcelona that we are looking at there. So this is the problem. We have not just a fire problem, we have an environmental problem, which is a very complex problem we need to solve, but we need to understand what we are solving for. Once we understand the things we are solving for, we need a couple of things to come in place. One is the cross-sector expertise. We need to be able to work across public, private, academia, industry. All kinds of industries need to come together. We need more science and technology innovation because the conditions are changing. The science is changing fast with it. Our understanding of the risks and scientific conditions leading to this. And we need funding to address to these knowledge gaps and policy reforms. And we heard some of those from Nick really nicely. So how do we make all of these actionable? What's actionable science and technology in the first place? It means getting the right AI, right science, fire science models with the right data together in a way that we can communicate at the right time to decision makers. And decision makers can be all along the decision chain, but also the public and other communities that are living around fire for better understanding and training. That's exactly what we are trying to do in the Y-Fire program that I lead since 2010. We develop technologies with fire management in a way that we can integrate cutting-edge science and technology into those solutions so we can actually create that impact through cutting-edge science at the scale we are experiencing the challenges. So we can maybe catch the change and respond to it in a way, or maybe get ahead of it in a way that we can get us ourselves from the fire problem. So there are multiple ways to focus on here. Two of them is being reactive, so creating reactive technologies that we call to fight these fires that are happening. So fast action, fast initial attack is one of those. And the other way to look at it is also we can be proactive. We can create prescribed fires, other mitigation and prevention strategies, and build tools and optimize those tools for better decision making. When we look at the two ends of that, the fire science, weather science, and land management related to those are different. One size doesn't fit all. In the response conditions, the risk is already there. We just need to understand where the fire needs to go, will go, and respond accordingly. So getting ahead of the fire, we need speed, and simpler models that give us that speed can help us. But when we look at more proactive angles of prescribed fire management, community planning, or understanding ecosystem effects in the long term together with climate change, we then need more complexity and detail that requires more use of AI and data sets that are higher resolution, more complex. All these data coming together can also come in smoke, right? We don't have understanding of smoke, actually. What's in the fire smoke? What's in the fire smoke and air together with it in terms of particulates on what's burning in that environment. How does that smoke transport in the air? And even when it transports, is it the same smoke? When the California fire reaches Barcelona, is that the same smoke are we talking about in terms of its toxicity or risk to human beings and ecosystems around it? So these are some more examples of that knowledge gap that we need to actually bridge so we can now give it to the hands of decision makers in land, fire, air management. All these needs data. Data comes from ground-based weather stations, cameras, satellites, aircraft, many other forms of sensing, much more use of sensing, LiDAR sensing, air quality sensing happening, and historical databases. How do we actually tame all this data so that we can actually get all this data that we are generating? We are becoming a very data-rich, area to work in. And then we kind of create an infrastructure to serve all those data sets, ingest them, curate them, integrate them, and in this day and age, make them discoverable at least, or make them what we refer to as AI ready. So AIs can actually help us to assist us in decision making together with interpretation of those data sets and combining them with scientific knowledge. So once we start serving them, what we are noticing is we see a higher reuse of these data sets by different solution makers. We are seeing an increase in the economy generated by also fire tech industry. And we are seeing more and more innovators coming into this space. But how do we do this? How do we create a standardized data infrastructure like the commons I was talking about while we are generating rapid solutions? I think we need to do both. We need to be able to think through how can we acquire technology, build a rapid solution. When we do that, how can we actually get this byproducts of that? And like FireSat, for instance, is a great example that we are seeing. How do we get that to the hands of the innovators through a standardized infrastructure? By embracing open science and data through a commons approach. So what we've been building, thanks to support from our Senator Padilla and Representatives Vargas and Jacobs, under funding from National Institute of Standards and Technology, is to build a wildfire science and technology commons so we can actually create a standardized framework with an expert community, expert cross-sector community to collaborate around so we can bring practitioners together with innovators and scientists to develop fast solutions while we are integrating everything through the standardized environment as a commons for others to then join us. So there's an innovation approach here, and I think we should be thinking through these new models of innovation. Collectively, we can understand what will be useful. We can understand the gaps, and we can understand ways we can engage new forms of science and technology to address those gaps. And then we can create our innovation pathways to then link these advanced, newer forms of science and technology to generate new products together through innovation pathways. And since we start collectively together, we need to continue that and develop with scale and sustained partnerships so we can deploy these solutions at scale and get it out of the hands of the innovators in ways that become either fire tech companies or public-private partnership that stay in the government space. There's a role for everyone. There's a role for big tech. There's a role for academia. There's definitely a role for government and nonprofits that are operating in this space. So it's collective impact, collective innovation we are after. And I think if we embrace the right data technologies, we'll be able to generate solutions to get us out of this problem that we are facing around the world. And data and tech, again, I always end with this, it's just a means to an end. Let's not forget our objectives. Let's think what we are solving for. And everything we are solving for will require us to engage with science and technology in different ways, grounded in operational experience. We cannot start in this space with science and technology without understanding the operational needs. And there's a role for open science, open data, as I mentioned, and that's going to also help us with new models for policy and business, and hopefully get us to a cultural shift that we can collectively impact and solve our own problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much, İlkay. And I have to say that was a wonderful follow-up where Nick really did present the big picture of how bad this problem is. And I loved when you said this is a problem we can solve, whether it's through regulation or infrastructure and with some finance, but not one size fits all. And that's why we have to think about data for decision making, for impact, for action. And it comes back to this issue again about how to bridge that gap between data, whether on the costs or on the solutions and how to turn that into action. But I know one of the questions I'm going to come to you, Ilkay, after Giovanbattista has spoken is around what do you see as the barriers to uptake of some of these new technologies and this new data for decision making. But first we're going to hear from our colleague who I believe is based in Rome. Giovanbattista is with us, who's going to give us some examples from the Mediterranean forests and the integrated forest fire management that they're undertaking. Giovanbattista, can you hear us? I know we saw you one moment ago. We're going to get you back again. This is the exciting part about global conferences, when we want to bring voices from everywhere, including people who can't be here with us. As we're trying to get Giovanbattista, Nick, in 1 minute, what is the key thing we need to bridge the kind of economic cost data you talked about and getting actual action for prevention?
Yeah, I think Ilkay said it in one word, which was speed. If there are laws and regulations on your books that inhibit the deployment of technology, inhibit mechanical thinning, inhibit prescribed burns, I would work aggressively to make those as easy as possible. Yes, we have some knowledge gaps, and we have to fly the plane as we build it, but we do know some solutions are proven and exist, and we need to make sure the laws and regulations on the books allow for it.
I think that's a great bridge to Giovanbattista, because he's representing FAO. He's on loan to FAO right now, which is the norm-creating body of the UN when it comes to forests. So Giovanbattista, what lessons do you have from the work you're doing on the Mediterranean? We cannot hear you. Can you try again?
Hello, can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. Thank you.
I hope to have a good connection, but because actually I'm not there because I am in a concurrent event in Morocco, a country-led initiative with the UNFF. So I apologize for not being there. I appreciate your invitation. And now I also hope that there is not noise because, well, the room where I am, it is quite noisy. So do I share my presentation or you, okay.
I believe we're going to share it from here. Is that correct?
Okay.
Or Giovanbattista, please, if you can share it, if you have it, that may be easier. Then you can control it from where you are.
Okay. Just a few seconds.
It speaks to the global world we're in, that you're sitting in Morocco, we're sitting in Turkey, and we're all talking about forests and forest fires.
Yeah, and the problem is that I have also another presentation in a few minutes, so I hope to be on time for everything. Okay, let me share the screen. Okay, it is very, continue to share. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So, again, thank you for this invitation. I'm very, very honored to be with you, at least remotely, to talk about forest fire management in the Mediterranean with a focus on the vision of Silva Mediterranea. Well, just a very quick introduction of Silva Mediterranea, which is a statutory body of FAO that was actually created at the beginning of the 20th century and then became part of FAO in the mid of 1950. It is basically a committee of 27 countries, including also the UN. And well, it is a cross-cutting body. It deals with several topics related to Mediterranean forests, and it is organized currently in 5 working groups: wood, forest product, forest fires, forest genetic resources, urban and peri-urban forestry, and desertification restoration. And then we have a cross-cutting network of youth, the Mediterranean, the Mediterranean Youth Task Force. So the focus of Silva Mediterranea is on the 88 million hectare of forest in the region, or if we focus on the bioclimatic region, on the 25.5 million hectare of forest. not considering the border of countries, but the bioclimatic envelope of the Mediterranean region. So we know that these forests are threatened by numerous challenges with the degradation processes. And according to some studies, there are, potentially around 80 million hectares of area, not only forest, that can be recovered by restoration. One of these major threats, as we know, is wildfire. Here's some data on fire trends in the Mediterranean region. This data will be published in the coming soon State of Mediterranean Forests, that is a pillar publication of Silva Mediterranea. You can see, as said before, the trends in terms of number is positive, and clearly there is not a general trends. There is a great variation among countries, because clearly this depends on the landscape resilience, governance, and also the level of preparedness of the different countries. But it is important clearly to know that wildfires affect biodiversity, rural livelihoods, carbon sinks, landscape resilience, and in general is a socio-economic challenge for the Mediterranean, and not only clearly. So what Silva Mediterranea does with the countries to promote a shift from a reactive firefighting to integrated fire governance rooted in landscape resilience, prevention, and regional cooperation. That can be achieved basically through investing in prevention, bridging science and practice, empowering local actors, coordinating through a regional coordination, and aligning finance and policy. All these, let's say, principles or pillars were grouped, I'd say, in the effort that Silva Mediterranea did some years ago, presenting the region to the UN Decade Restoration, presenting the Mediterranean as a unique body with good examples of wildfire prevention and restoration, and this flagship was recognized by the UN Decades, and so here you can see the name of this effort, restoring Mediterranean forest. It is rooted in the collaboration and discussion among the member countries during their sessions in Roman in Lebanon in 2019, and also in Antalya, Turkey in 2022. And also considering the mid-assessment of the restoration efforts in the region made in the context of the Agadir commitment. So this brought to conceive the region as a whole, as I said before, with the objective to prevent wildfire, so reduce the risk of wildfire, increasing sustainable forest management, restoring landscape damaged by fire and overuse, enhancing biodiversity, which is under acute threat, as said, and creating green jobs for the sustainable development of rural areas. So the flagship actually received a target support fund for capitalizing good practices on post-fire restoration in the Mediterranean by showcasing effective post-fire restoration practices used in the region that could be replicated also in different areas and set the basis for regional collaboration. By providing knowledge sharing and learning opportunities for all stakeholders dealing with fire management, with the overall goal of increasing the political will to seek a joint regional effort to restore more resilient landscape prone to wildfire risk. So in this context, we have made meaningful progresses. Sorry. Here I'm reporting some examples for this collaboration, data sharing, knowledge experience. We started this winter collaborating with NEN-FIRE, which is the fire hub, let's say, of the MENA region, Northeast and North Africa, through a workshop on integrated fire management. Then recently we also organized another event on integrated fire management in Antalya, Turkey, at the end of May 2025. And then recently in Rome last week, also organized a side event on the cross-regional collaboration for integrated fire management. And we're also preparing an e-learning training session on best practices on post-fire restoration that should be released by the end of this year. Well, other recent highlights born through the collaboration among countries are several side events and also plenary session on post-fire restoration and wildfire prevention during the Mediterranean Forest Week, which is a forum organized by Silva Mediterranea to enhance the collaboration among countries in the region. One of these events was in Antalya in March 2022, and then the last one was in Barcelona in November 2024, there is a typo. Then we also organized another joint workshop on innovation in forest fire prevention in Antalya in 2022. And also to enhance the collaboration, also not only with the region, the properly said Mediterranean region, but also with more eastern countries. With the Near East Forest and Land Commission of FAO, we organized a side event on restoration initiatives in the Mediterranean region. And then we also produced some key publications, the key recommendations for wildfire prevention in the Mediterranean area that was launched in Porto during the Global Wildfire Congress. And then another key publication, the Una Silva, a special issue on restoring the Mediterranean region, status and challenges. Here there is a global view of the efforts for not only on fire, but in general on the status on forest conservation and restoration in the area. And then, as said before, the state of Mediterranean forest. It is a chapter dedicated to wildfire that should be released by the end of this summer. So, from all this discussion and collaboration, what are the main how can I say fields where we can do better? So, as said in the previous presentation, data are very basic. We need to harmonize and to share data not only on fire, but actually with the work that I did with Silva Mediterranea, there is also a huge gap on post-fire restoration. So what are the results of the efforts that we put in place when we want to recover the forest and forest ecosystem? So we need also to expand the regional training and the opportunities for knowledge sharing and capacity building. We need to engage all stakeholders. So the research fields, the stakeholders, the policy makers. So this dialogue is not always straightforward. And then we need to integrate the fire into land planning. So as we do for earthquakes or floods, we need to consider the fire event, the return periods of fire better in the planning of our cities, landscape when we build infrastructure, etc. Well, all this stuff is considered in the next working group, in the next work plan of the working group of Silva Mediterranea for fire, which is focused on governance, integrated fire management, prevention, international cooperation, research, and innovation. So I don't go into the details. It is not here maybe to place, but just to say that Silva Mediterranea is working into this direction with different countries, member countries. So, as a take-home message, I feel to say that wildfire resilience begins not in the heat of the emergency, but with planning, investment, and solidarity. And in the Mediterranean region, Silva Mediterranea is ready to support and coordinate this process with governments, NGOs, scientists, youth, and local communities. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Giovanbattista. And I know we were running late, and I know you have to run to your next presentation. But I think this issue, particularly on solidarity that you introduced, we've heard already that we have to work across agencies, but we also have to work across countries. Forest fires don't know jurisdictions, they cross boundaries. And so the data we use, the data we collect, the training that we do similarly has to cross boundaries. I know we're running late. I'm going to take an additional 5 minutes. If there's any questions from the audience, and as you think about a question, and we'll take no more than 2, I do want to ask İlkay the question that I had mentioned to her, which is, we've heard from all 3 speakers the importance of action. It's what the minister this morning called on us to do, ensure there is impact. Yeah. So when it comes to the cutting edge of technology and data that you talked about, what is preventing the uptake of those new technologies and data to fight fire?
A great question, and I think it's very complex because one part of it, let's look at the enablers first. Enablers are, we need to establish trust, we need to understand the problems, we need to build the right data infrastructure, and we need to build policies around it. Right? They are, if you look at them as the enablers, and we need to build a culture around it, the barriers, so to say, are exactly those, actually. Because understandably, these areas, and in general, environmental protection is not a new area to be in. And there are healthy bureaucracies in there. There's a culture and workflows that we built over time. Suddenly, we are trying a big shift in these. So there are definitely cultural barriers to it. But in general, our society, not just governments, our society isn't ready for AI. We are not even ready for data, actually, at the scale that we are experiencing data. So we need to really invest in more data infrastructure, and we need to build partnership that actually help us increase the level of trust we have between ourselves, so understanding. Once we establish understanding, I think it will be easier to make policy reforms around use of AI and bring in legal frameworks that allow us to actually catalyze through data the change.
No, and I don't see any hands up, but Nick, if I can follow up on İlkay's point on trust, how do you build that trust when we have the numbers, we know how bad the problem is, we have incredibly robust agencies like OGM here in Turkey who can do the work when they're given the financing, and yet we have regulators who aren't necessarily prioritizing prevention. How do you build trust so that you can get that finance that Giovanbattista had mentioned is so critical to this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And part of it is community engagement. We've talked a lot about collaboration. It's really important to collaborate with the communities that you were involved in. From my experience in the Western United States, we know prescribed burns, for instance, are a very effective tool. But communities don't like it because they see smoke from the prescribed burns, and then they raise objections to that. They raise objections to mechanical thinning and logging projects, which can really help reduce wildfire risk because they think it's going to clear-cut forests, and that's how we did things in the past, so that's how we're going to do things in the future, when that's not necessarily the case. So I think having that collaboration with the communities who are not just most at risk, but most involved with the deployment of the technology as well as the deployment of the active forest management is essential to ensuring that they are good stewards and good partners in good faith.
Giovanbattista, was that your experience in the Mediterranean? Did working in solidarity with the community, with the men and women living at that urban forest interface, was that a critical piece of having some of the success you've already had?
Yeah, it is, and the community-based forest management, fire management is very critical. I want to complement what the colleague, I'm sorry, now I don't remember your name, said before, because actually prescribed burning is also a traditional tool for controlling fire. But, well, actually, yes, but the point is that maybe as urban people, we lost the connection with ancient, let's say, tradition. So we need to bring back this old-fashioned forest management, and that's why we need local communities or indigenous peoples, clearly depending on the context, to be integrated into the forest and fire planning and management. And yeah, in the most successful cases, everything started from the bottom, so from the people living in the forest.
And I think it speaks to the strength of traditional, old-fashioned, and yet critically important interventions to understand the difference between good fires and bad fires, as we've heard here today. But I really do want to thank this fantastic panel, because there were 4 lessons that I'm taking home with me. The first really is that this is a global problem. Forest fires are not a problem of poor countries, they're not a problem of emerging economies, they're happening just as much in advanced economies. And they're not just happening in rural areas, they're happening at the urban interface. And they're not just a problem for forest ministries and forest agencies, they're a problem for ministries of finance. They're a problem for private business, they're a problem for the families especially, whose lives and livelihoods, their homes, are in the direct line of fire. So it is a global problem, it's everybody's problem, and it's a huge problem. That was the second thing I think that we really heard today. The numbers that both Nick and Ilkay were telling us are just frightening. $100 billion potentially on average every year. One fire in California causing $250 billion in the space of 1 month. And that doesn't even begin to count the types of longer-term costs to governments when you're going to have generations of children growing up with asthma, with lung problems, because if there's 1 billion people exposed to wildland fire smoke every year, that's going to be a long-term cost for governments to pay for their health care going forward. So it's a global problem, it's everyone's problem, it's a huge problem, and we have the numbers, but it's a problem with proven solutions. And I think this is something especially that Ilkay and Giovanbattista were able to show us with really good examples. And these are solutions that are built on data and information and AI, and they're solutions that have to be done in collaboration with everybody. It's a whole of society, whole of government approach to solving these problems. And that the best solution, and this was the last lesson, is still prevention. That means having robust regulations around forest management, around fuels management, around allowing those good fires and that mechanical thinning. It's around having strong institutions like OGM who are actually ready to implement those regulations. It's about having the right infrastructure in place. The aircraft, the water infrastructure, but also the information technology infrastructure to use that data for better decision making. And finally, of course, it's about money to finance it all. And the wonderful thing is, over the next few days, we have sessions on each one of these areas for solution. Thank you very much, everybody. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panel. And we are back, I believe, at 1:30. You can look at the back of this for the rest of the agenda. Thank you, everybody.
Colleagues, welcome back. We're hoping some of you can move forward in case you'd like, in case you might hear better. And just a quick note that we're going to try and move away from the presentation